Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fireside Chat at the IGI. So this is a occasional event that we are going to hold as a series going forward. And today, it's my great pleasure to do this chat with Brad Ringeisen, who is our brand new executive director at the IGI. So before I introduce Brad a little more formally and then turn it over to him to tell us a little bit about his background, I wanted to just point out a couple of things. First of all, I welcome everyone to both mute their line and also feel free to type questions into the chat box as we go along, and we'll have plenty of time at the end of this conversation to get back to your questions. So please feel free to do that. And the other thing is I wanted to give a really big shout out to a number of people at the IGI that have made not only this event possible, but are doing extraordinary work right now to enable our COVID-related efforts and all of the ongoing science that the IGI supports. And it'll be hard to thank everybody that I should thank, but I want to give special acknowledgement to Andy and Megan, who have enabled this particular event. Clarice as well is, I think, coordinating the actual webinar format for this. Melanie Cantarudi and her team of staff who are just tireless in bringing on board the people we need to lead the various, especially COVID-related work that we're doing right now. And that includes Christy and Yulia, who's been, both of them, hugely helpful. Edward, who keeps the building running. Ariana, who keeps us in supplies. And Lucy, who is a project manager and has been filling in on many needed tasks as this pandemic has unfolded. So thank you to all of you and to everyone else at IGI. I mean, we're every day when I wake up in the morning, there are depressing headlines, but I remember that I work with an incredible team, and I'm really, really grateful for everything that all of you are doing. So I am really delighted to introduce Brad to you here. I think for many of you, you may be meeting him for the first time in this format, and that's partly because he's actually still on the East Coast. Brad comes to us from his most recent post at DARPA, where he was a director, and he'll tell you about that in a moment. And you know, our great good fortune to find, first of all, to find somebody with Brad's deep scientific knowledge and his organizational skill sets is quite extraordinary. And also I thought that it probably would bear mentioning, why did we recruit an executive director to the IGI? So many of you know that I founded the IGI with Jonathan Weissman about 5 years ago now. And Jonathan and I, for several years, served as co-directors of the Institute when it was in its formative years. And more recently, we've morphed into a more structured organization, and it became clear that we need a real professional to run the place, and somebody who's going to be able to build the teams and organize the activities at the IGI to be most effective as we move forward with our strategic plan. And so that led to our motivation to hire a new executive director. And then you may be wondering, well, what about me and what about Jonathan? Well, Jonathan Weissman has moved to the Whitehead, so you may know that he is now himself on the East Coast, and he has agreed to serve as the chair of our scientific advisory board. So Jonathan will stay involved in that capacity. And for myself, my plan is now to take over as the chair of our governance board, where I will play a role chiefly in helping to set the strategy for the IGI, as well as to raise the essential money that we need to do our work. And so I'm actually really, really excited to be partnering with Brad in all of this, and to increasingly let him take the reins of really running the IGI and making sure that we are a professional organization that can execute on our big plans and big dreams. So Brad, I'd like to turn it over to you for a minute, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your scientific background, first of all, and then secondly, what drew you to the IGI?
Yeah, that's great. And thank you so much. And I'm just so excited to be here or be here virtually, I guess, because all of us are sort of living in this virtual world right now. But I want to first say, number one, just a thank you to you, Jennifer, and to all those that I met during my interview process, and just how excited I am to be in this position for IGI right now. And I wanted just to start a little bit and give people an idea of who I am. At least from a scientific perspective. And you know, I am not a traditional molecular biologist. I am not a gene editor. That's not what I've done in the laboratory, but I'm very much a believer in sort of the scientific method. And you know, look, I'm a PhD physical chemist. I don't think you could get much further away from some of the things that Jennifer or others and some of their scientific backgrounds way back when I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But what's sort of defined my career over the last 20 years of scientific bench work, as well as sort of program management and leadership, has been applied research, taking research from the laboratory and bringing it into reality. And look, as soon as I became a postdoc at the Naval Research Laboratory, that was the primary focus of what we did at the Naval Research Laboratory. 9/11 occurred about a year into my tenure after being a postdoc. That shaped sort of the rest of my career at the Naval Research Laboratory. You could not just do basic research. We had a national emergency occur, and that was something that immediately brought focus to attention to the urgent need of being able to use science and technology to help protect our citizens and to help protect our soldiers. So, but look, that doesn't mean that I only focus on application spaces. I actually have a pretty rich, diverse background in publications. When I was a postdoc, I started this crazy field called cell printing, which nobody really understood. It wasn't even really called bioprinting at that point. But I was one of the first people to actually put a living mammalian cell and a living bacteria in sort of a print ink medium to droplet by droplet sort of print organized two-dimensional and three-dimensional structures of living cells. And that was really pretty cool. I really loved that, just to be able to go. I remember the very, very first experiment I did. I actually took a glass slide, dipped it in liquid nitrogen that had an E. coli solution on it. And I literally held with my hand up in front of a laser a frozen solution of E. coli and printed it onto an agar plate to be able to demonstrate that those E. coli bacteria were still viable. So if I had to sort of mention, you know, that my favorite experiment, it was probably that experiment way back in the day. But I carried that work all the way through my entire career. And I started a section at the Naval Research Laboratory called Biofabrication and Bioenergy. I focused specifically on sort of cell printing and bioprinting, as well as an area that was called microbial fuel cells and extracellular electron transfer of bacteria. And, you know, again, it's sort of another really exciting experiment that I did was measure the amount of current, the number of electrons that actually can be generated by a single bacterium. And we collaborated with Harvard University to be able to make that measurement. It turns out it's about 100, 150 femtoamps that this one single bacteria was able to generate. So I've got a pretty diverse background of scientific experience. But really, I think what brought me ultimately to IGI was my experience sort of in program management. And I got away from the bench and got these experiences that outside of an academic environment, I think might be kind of foreign to a lot of the people at UC Berkeley and UCSF. You know, what do you do in program management? What exactly does that mean? What are these government scientists that work in program management? And I learned really quickly, both at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, where I managed some programs on field forward diagnostics and paper lateral flow diagnostics, and then more recently at DARPA. And I was kind of hired in as a program manager, but then quickly filled a void in leadership at the Biological Technologies Office. And basically became a jack of all trades. I mean, the Biological Technologies Office had foundational investments in synthetic biology and infectious disease research, neurotechnology. These are things that are pretty profoundly life-changing to a lot of individuals now. And no better, you don't have to look any further than COVID-19 to understand that. So the office that I managed and the office that I led at DARPA was responsible for the Moderna and Inovio vaccines. We funded for chikungunya, the first mRNA vaccine, which now is essentially being used for COVID-19. So that's something that we really are proud of. And then secondly, investments that we made in antibody discovery and antibody manufacture have now directly resulted in first-in-human for antibodies for COVID-19 as well. So there's some real practical applications that we're really, I'm really proud of to be associated with at DARPA. One of the things I should add as well is that during my time at DARPA BTO, we made some really important investments in gene editing technologies with the program Safe Genes, where we sort of decided that it was important to put safety bumpers on some of the gene editing tools and technologies. But we also wanted to expand, and I worked really closely with our program manager, Ringeisen, to develop the programs Prepare and Dig It, where we looked at going further into transcriptional editing and epigenetic editing, and then with Dig It into diagnostics development using gene editing technologies for diagnostics. And so I've had a lot of experience taking sort of these basic technologies and tools from the laboratory with the ultimate goal of really applying them towards applications in the clinic.
This is a great example of how, I mean, all of those actually are great examples of how really important sort of, discoveries come from fundamental research, asking, questions about just how things work and unexpected directions of discoveries that
I'm giving you the highlights after 8, 9, 10 years of investment sometimes at DARPA, where nobody believed in nucleic acid vaccines. DARPA invested in nucleic acid vaccines. Nobody thought about an antibody or a gene-encoded antibody as being something that was useful or valuable. DARPA made those investments 5 or 6 years ago, and now COVID-19 hits, and those investments paid off in a really big way.
Absolutely. So it's really a
model that I want to take with me to IGI for sure.
Absolutely. And as you know, this is what the IGI is really all about. I mean, I think, one of the things that we've done at IGI over the last 18 months or so is we've really been doing some deep, thinking and sort of cogitating with all of our colleagues on both sides of the bay about, how do we take fundamental research and make sure that it has a broad impact on people that need it. And for me personally, I feel deeply committed to this. I think, here we are, IGI is embedded at, one of the probably the world's very best, public university. And we have an opportunity here to make sure that fundamental science and discoveries are brought to bear on real world problems, and that it's done with an eye towards affordability, accessibility, education, making sure people understand technology and how it's going to impact their lives. That's really underlies everything that the IGI does, right? And so, Brad, just for everybody that's listening, so you and I have now had a lot of opportunity to talk about your vision going forward for the IGI, and to really think about how do we explain who we are and what we're doing to people that either are not very familiar with us or maybe think they know about the IGI, but that maybe haven't paid close attention to what we're actually up to under that awning of IGIB, so or across the bay. And so I thought maybe, so recently I was going to tell everyone that you and I said we kind of challenged ourselves and said could we write a couple of sentences that would capture what we're doing, and Brad, I thought your sentences were just amazing. Did you want to share that with the folks here?
Yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah, I'll go for it. And honestly, it captures, generally, it was pretty easy for me to write. I mean, I struggled with it initially, but after I kind of thought about why I wanted to be at IGI, it actually came off pretty easily because all of those things that you said, look, I've worked for the federal government my entire career, Jennifer, and that's something that I don't take the word civil servant lightly. That's something that is in my DNA. I want to serve the people. That is something and when I thought about life post-DARPA, going to work for a company or a pharmaceutical company, it just didn't seem like the right fit for me. And being able to go to a big public university and a place like IGI, where sort of the sky's the limit with respect to people and technology, it really spoke to me. And that's really, to me, why I want to be here. So What are the sentences? So we'll see. We will debut these, Jennifer, and see how we want. So this is sort of the mission statement, or what we think is the mission statement of IGI. So the Innovative Genomics Institute's mission is to bridge revolutionary gene editing tool development to affordable and accessible solutions in climate and human health. We envision a world where genomic technology is routinely applied to cure genetic disease, enable sustainable agriculture, and help achieve a carbon neutral economy. And so as you can see, we essentially are trying to focus on two pillars here. We're trying to focus on human health and gene therapies, and we're trying to focus on sort of a net carbon neutral economy. And I think biotechnology and genomics technology specifically can play a really integral role there that hasn't been discussed, I think, in the public media as much as it could be. And I think it really positions IGI in a really robust, really strong position moving forward.
So, these are two really big topics, obviously, dealing with genetic disease and dealing with climate change. And there are, of course, many academic labs and other institutes that are working in these areas, as well as obviously a large collection of biotechnology and other types of companies. So what in your mind, Brad, especially coming in from the outside as you are, what makes IGI different and special? What makes us uniquely positioned to have an impact in these areas, do you think?
Yeah, I think, first of all, from the very highest level, I don't think there's maybe a handful of institutions that would be able to cover those two spaces. I think that just by positioning those two application spaces juxtaposed next to each other, I think that there's some uniqueness that's brought to bear there. But if you dig down into that onion a little bit, I want to first say just how impressed I've been with the people. Okay, I met a lot of people during the interview process. I don't even want to think about the number of hours that I spent on Zoom during that interview process, but I met a lot of people. But even in the first 3 weeks of being here, I've met some really amazing people. And I think that the people alone are part of the distinguishing factor of what makes IGI unique. But it's not just people, it's their ideas and their technology and the things that they bring to the table. And it's easy to say, oh, gene editing, and it's just gene editing. We're not just talking about gene editing. To be able to take gene editing from the laboratory and from a petri dish into the real world takes a tremendous number of depth of multidisciplinary. It takes chemistry, it takes material science, it takes protein chemistry, immunology, molecular biology, obviously microbiology and discovery of new tools. And IGI incorporates and encompasses all of those things. And I think when you add all of that up, it becomes a tremendously unique entity. Now, that's number one. Number two, I think, is the quality of institutions and the quality of science that goes on in a place like Berkeley, a place like UCSF, and a place like Gladstone. Being in the Bay Area and being able to leverage those, the wealth of innovation, the wealth of intelligence and ideas that are generated at those institutions, it just gets me really excited to think about the future of what we're able to accomplish, because just in the tip of the iceberg of the people I've interacted with over the last 3 weeks has just reinforced my desire to be able to be here and to be able to contribute and to be able to help sort of bring people together and challenge them to accomplish and go after some really big challenges that are facing society over the next decade.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what I'm excited about at IGI is that, as you said, Brad, this is I can't imagine a better intellectual environment. I mean, we have the most extraordinary colleagues, and from faculty to postdocs, undergraduates, staff members. I mean, these are just extraordinary people who are incredibly dedicated and really deeply thinking about how to have an impact with their work and their science, which is amazing, and that's what keeps many of us here, at this university in the first place. And then to embed within that environment an organization like ours that really seeks to make sure that our fundamental work and research and technology development is used in the most equitable fashion. I think it's really a very motivating goal for me personally, I have to say. And to be able to do that with, just amazing people who share values and really see the importance of doing this kind of work together, and doing it in a way that, as much as possible breaks down kind of the traditional silos that we find in academics. I think this is really what the IGI
are aligned really well on that, Jennifer, and I think that that's
yeah,
something that will hopefully make this institute really special, is the fact that accessibility and equity is something that drives you. And I think, again, me coming in from sort of my government background, that's what the government's purpose is. At the essence of what government is, it is to serve the people. And if we just serve the top 1% of people, that's not serving people. And I really think that sort of biotechnology and sort of, gene editing and such is an equalizing factor. I mean, this is something that we talk about every day, is the fact that it's in the hands of everyone. It's something that everyone can work with this. And I think that our job at IGI, and talking about sort of getting out of bed and motivations that drive me to get me out of bed now that I'm in this position at IGI, is exactly that, is bringing these tools to bear so that everyone can benefit from them, that it's not just something that the top individuals in the country and the world can benefit from.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I mean, I think one case in point is really how the IGI has been interacting with our colleagues and kind of a large community of people, ranging from donors to scientists and to our campus and our government, is through the what's happened with the pandemic, right? And really what we've been able to achieve just in the last few months. I'm really proud of our team for putting up a clinical testing lab on the Berkeley campus. That's a first in the campus history, to my knowledge, where we've had a clinical lab of this type that's an extension of our student health service. And that has really attracted a lot of collaborative opportunities. We've been able to raise significant money from donors that has supported and is supporting research that's going on by now a large collection of scientists, both at Berkeley and at UCSF, and then a few that are outside of that at Stanford and Davis. And it's importantly, it's really built up a community of people who are interacting that might not have had that opportunity otherwise. So that's
what IGI needs to be, right? And I think that when an institution is young, look, BTO at DARPA, Biological Technologies Office, when I arrived at BTO, it was like 3 years old, right? I mean, people said that it was sort of in an adolescent phase, and there were fits and starts, and there wasn't, I see IGI in that same kind of realm where you guys founded it on these concepts that we've talked about. Now is the time, I think, to really put it in an extra gear. And I think COVID-19 was one of these examples where you said this during my interview process, Jennifer, where it coalesced people. People were excited. People came together. People saw a mission and they really stepped up. I think part of my challenge now is going to be to place out more of those challenges out to the community, to bring people together, to think about those solutions, to devise solutions. I'm always a big believer that if you put a really smart person in a room alone, they'll come up with pretty good solutions. They'll come up with a set of solutions that are based on their experiences. But if you put lots of really smart people together in the same room, then there's an exponential factor there where you really start to come up with unique orthogonal aspects that you wouldn't have come up with if it's just operating in a vacuum. And so IGI can be that room. It can be that virtual room, literally right now. But it can be that space where people come together, that you get the material scientist and the chemist and the molecular biologist and the microbiologist in the same room. And I know it seems easy to say that, but in some cases, I think my philosophy is that I can throw out challenges. I can throw out things that I think can stimulate people's excitement to get them in that room. Then we can work with the development team, we can work with the communications team to really start to actually instantiate that and make it into something that's real.
Absolutely. So Brad, maybe we can, this has been a very nice chat so far, and sort of more about the formal interactions that we've had and ideas that we have at our work, but maybe we can talk a little bit more now about what we like to do outside of lab. Help all the folks that are listening to get to know you and I guess me, if people don't know.
Well, I'm going to throw it back. If I'm going to talk about my personal life, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Okay, I'm not going to escape. All right. So Brad, maybe you can tell us first of all, what's the craziest thing that ever happened to you in the lab?
Oh God. I'll start with the stupidest thing that I ever did in the lab, Jennifer. If I was in person, I would be pointing to stitches, scar tissue on my palm of my hand, because when I was running microbial fuel cells in the laboratory, we would have a bath of Shigella oneidensis bacteria. And we had to use peristaltic pumps to draw the bacteria up and then run it through a fuel cell and then run it back into the lab. Why, you might ask, would I use glass pipettes in that drawing up process? Why would I not use plastic? I don't know, because I was using glass pipettes, trying to stuff the glass pipette through a rubber stopper. Of course, the glass pipette breaks, boom, right into my hand. And of course, as a good government employee, guess what that means? That means I get to fill out workers' comp paperwork. I get to rush myself. Actually, I had my postdoc drive me to the emergency room. And then, my supervisor, I had to endure my supervisor lecturing me about all of the hassle and paperwork that she had to go through based on my stupidity in the lab. So not so great, but I've got a nice little scar remembrance there to remind me that, maybe you need to think a little bit about before you.
So if anybody at IGI needs stitches or, we can come to you for.
Yep. But yeah, I tell you, getting needle pokes of Novocaine in the palm of your hand, not so much fun. I can attest to that. So how about you, Jennifer? Go back in the day?
Well,
give us an example.
The thing I remember was, being in grad school, and we used to make DNA oligos on a machine in the lab, and that was my lab job, and this had big 4-liter bottles of waste, including trichloroacetic acid that was would sort of accumulate during these oligosyntheses. And one day, this didn't actually happen to me, but I was there when it happened. My coworker in the lab picked up this waste bottle that was filled with, trichloroacetic acid, and it had a star crack in it. It broke over her and just soaked her clothing. And without even thinking about it, in the middle of the lab, she stripped naked and had to call an emergency shower, right? Because, she had to. And I've never forgotten that, because first of all, I thought, wow, she had the wherewithal to do that and just do it without thinking about it. Just do what you needed to do for your health, and she did. And secondly, we had a rotation student in the lab, a man, who also never forgot this. He came down the hall looking the other way. He was trying to hide his eyes, and he was holding out a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt for her to pull on. It was very sweet.
That's the community. There's the community.
Yeah, great example. Yeah.
Well, my second story, Jennifer, is very similar to that. Back in grad school, I used these giant diffusion pumps. They must have been 200-gallon sort of cones. And of course, being like the first-year grad student, my job was to clean the inside of these giant pumps. So being the brainiac that I was, I started dumping like gallons of acetone into these giant pumps. And this was back in the day, right? The 90s, acetone, go figure. And I'm cleaning out these pumps. Lo and behold, I didn't realize that I forgot to put the plug in the bottom of the pump. So acetone starts literally draining out of the bottom of this pump and starts eating away the floor tiles beneath this pump. And I scream out, problem, big problem. So my grad student peers would never let me live down my problem, big problem. So anytime something went wrong in the lab, they were like, oh, Brad, is it a big problem? So
so if we hear you calling that out in the IGI, we should either run the other way or, yeah. Wow. Well, I guess the other question I was going to ask you is, tell us something that your family knows about you, but maybe your work colleagues don't.
Yeah, so a good one that I like to tell, because this sometimes starts some challenges within the community that I work. Ever since I was about 5 years old, I've played pool, billiards. So for whatever reason, and my mom hated this about my dad, that he always lugged this old ratty pool table. Every time we moved, it was like the pool table got this central location in the middle of the house. But as a kid growing up, like it was fantastic, right? I could play pool anytime I wanted to. So what people probably don't know about me is that my dad and mom both worked at Clemson University. So I grew up in the town of Clemson. It's about 10 or 12,000 people. But you know, you had this big 20,000 student university. My dad was the chair of the math department there. My mom taught in the accounting department. So they loved having friends over, and their friends usually were professors at Clemson. So here I was, this 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, and they'd have dinner parties. And well, my dad wanted me to always play these professors in pool. And it got to the point where I would actually be, the other professors would be betting money on me to beat some of their colleagues in pool. And I had a little stool that I would carry around the pool table and step on the stool and play pool. So I would have to say that at DARPA, there are a couple pictures that could circulate around with me doing like trick shots in pool. And so it's one of those things that I've carried on in my life. I think back in the day, I thought that I was going to be a professional billiards player, which now that I'm older, doesn't sound very cool.
That's kind of cool.
But I do. It's something that I'm able to do every once in a while. That's kind of fun. How about you, Jennifer? What you have something in mind that maybe all these people for a
gosh,
decade?
well, you know, when I think back, you know, similarly to when I was growing up. So I grew up in a small town in Hawaii, and my parents were also academics, but not scientists. You know, my dad was a literature professor at University of Hawaii, and my mom was a history teacher. And I was the science nerd in the family, and you know, always loved figuring things out from when I was, you know, even pretty young.
Was young Jennifer a surfer?
Say what?
Was young Jennifer a surfer?
Well, I like to tell people a body surfer. That doesn't sound so cool. I never did learn to board surf somehow, but boogie boarding, yes. Or actual board surfing, no, can't say I do.
All right, so you were the science nerd, which again, I mean, I question your choices there a little bit, but.
But there were some very cool things about being a science nerd in Hawaii. And one of them was that one of my dad's best friends was a biologist at the university. And what he liked to do, well, he had two interests, and they were both kind of academic interests, but they were really different. One of them was he was very interested in tiny, tiny shells and kind of the evolution of shells in Hawaii. So he looked at these shells with an electron microscope. Not of the type that Eva Nogales and our other colleagues are using to do cryo-EM, but this was actually just doing like scanning EM and looking at, you know, shell surfaces and things like that, these very, very tiny shells. And the other thing he really was very interested in was mushrooms, and all of these really cool, interesting types of mushrooms that had evolved uniquely in the environment of Hawaii. And so as a kid, I had a chance to experience both of those things by working one summer in this guy whose name is Don Hemis, his lab, doing scanning EM on these little super tiny shells, which was incredibly fun, you can imagine, for me, you know, to have that experience. And then the other was going out on these mushroom hunting walks.
Yeah, you gotta go find
literally going out, you know, trying to find new types of mushrooms and catalog them. And eventually that work actually ended up in a book called Mushrooms of Hawaii that was published by this guy, Don Hemis, and was just, you know, incredibly fun to be, for me, to be a kid, to be kind of.
Yeah, that's like the coolest job ever. Yeah, you get to go walk around the jungles or the tropics of Hawaii finding mushrooms.
It was a lot of fun. And so bottom line, Brad, you know, I think both of us, clearly we're both just, you know, we're geeks, right? And we love, you know, we feel passionate about our work. I think that's very clear. And for everyone that's, you know, part of the IGI, I think, you know, we're going to bring our passion to work every day, and, you know, continue to work on the things that we feel are very important, and also importantly enable all of you as much as possible to do your work, whether it's helping you raise money or find collaborators, get connected to the right resources that you need for your work, all of that kind of thing. I hope all of you that are listening here or you know, listen to the recording later will know that the IGI really, really wants to partner with you and to hear your ideas about the science that you think we should be doing. And I really want to open it up to some questions. And I do see one in the chat from Stacia Wyman. And the question is, could you speak to your plans for improving diversity and making IGI a welcoming environment for Black scientists? Extraordinary. That's a great question, Stacia, and something that obviously we're, I think, all aware is a super important issue and something that we need to address really urgently, not just with words, but with real actions. And Brad, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I have some ideas and I'd love to hear what you're thinking about this.
I have thought about this actually quite a bit because in my 15-year career at the Naval Research Laboratory, one of the things that I was absolutely most passionate about was sort of equal opportunity. And I worked really closely with a summer internship project that was focused exclusively on HBCU MIs. And, you know, look, there was a time point back in the day where that project was going to die because the National Science Foundation was going to pull its funding. And I worked really, really hard with the Office of Naval Research to reinvigorate and find new funding to be able to get those opportunities. And so now it's a robust program. And I think there's something like 30 or 35 students come in every single summer. I think that's something that we might be able to model. We may not have to go to the government, and we may be able to get donations to be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
But you know, look, I went out and visited some of those colleges, and you know, oftentimes the Naval Research Lab has extremely good, high quality infrastructure for laboratory. And you come in, these students come in and they're just blown away by the ability, you know, they didn't even necessarily realize that there were careers in science research. Most of them came in wanting to be dentists and doctors and nurses. And we opened their eyes to the possibility of being a professional scientist and all of the toys and gadgets and ideas and brainstorming that goes on. So you can't get that without having the one-on-one interactions that are able to be done by having sort of an internship program. So that's one idea that I was thinking of. I mean, obviously, I think we're internally here at IGI talking about hiring practices and ways to maybe better reach out to diverse communities when we put position descriptions and things on the street. So that's something that's an evolving conversation, and we're open to I think, hearing ideas from the community about how we maybe can better do that as well. But maybe you could share some of the things you're thinking about as well, Jennifer.
Yeah, well, I love this idea that you just mentioned. I think this is really important, is, you know, just helping people. I know, even thinking back to my own experience, right? You know, growing up in a small town, I didn't know any professional scientists and never really imagined what it would be like to work as a scientist. But I was just lucky that I got exposed to, you know, kind of the joy of discovery, right? What it's like to be in a research lab. And I think the more that we can do that at IGI, open that up to people in our community, reaching out to schools. We already do. Megan Hochstresser does quite a bit of work with local high school teachers. I think we could do more through that program. And Hope Henderson has been convening a group recently to think specifically about how we reach out to more Black scientists or you know, people who might like to become a scientist, and figuring out how to really welcome them into the community and make it possible for them to interact with us, find out who we are and what we do and how they might like to contribute. So I think, and I would like to really open it up to folks that are listening here in our community. If you have ideas that you'd like to bring forward to us, we'd really love to hear about it from you, because I think that we all agree that now is the time for action. You know, we really don't want to just talk about this anymore. We really want to just actually see real change.
Yeah, I'd be happy to reach out to some of my connections at the HBCUs and such as well. I'm sure they would jump at the opportunity to be associated with a place like Berkeley and IGI. So that's something that I think we can act on relatively quickly.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. David Zilberman is asking, how do you see social science and economics contributing to IGI? Another very very good question and something I've thought about, but Brad, I'll give that one to you first.
Yeah, I think, it's something that I see as sort of a building block, foundational building block across the Institute, that this isn't something that is an independent standalone pillar. My vision for how things like social science and economics contribute to IGI is to be side by side and partnership with the science. When we go to a donor, and look, I've worked with the development team a lot over the last 3 weeks, and they tell me that when they go pitch a scientific project or a scientific concept, oftentimes they want to hear that uniqueness of IGI, which is sort of the more societal, ethical, economic aspect. That's something that's unique to IGI. We are not a for-profit entity. This isn't something that we are out to make money on. There may be startups and there may be entrepreneurship opportunities and things that can run in parallel, but that's not the primary mission of the Institute. So for me, I see them progressing hand in hand, that it's not something that's going to be cordoned off as a separate pillar, that's a separate thing. This is something that there are going to be opportunities jointly as we develop a new idea. I think sickle cell disease is a perfect example. We have already sort of a portfolio established where we're looking at sort of the diversity and equity issues associated with sickle cell. And we also have sort of what we're calling the sickle cell disease therapy like 2.0 or 3.0. And I think that those things are going to be run in parallel. There are opportunities on both sides of the coin there to be able to have that. I think that's a great test case on how we can move forward with those types of joining of projects. Now, on the economic side, look, we've already talked about that. Our goal and our mission is to sort of have equity, to be able to lower the prices of drugs, to be able to allow access and economic modeling for things like agriculture and genetic therapies. We don't want them to be accessible just to those that have the means. We want to be able to use biotechnology and genomics technology to provide economic access and accessibility to all, if possible, where possible.
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. I couldn't agree more. I'm looking at another question, a couple questions here that have come in that are asking about the society arm of IGI and what that would look like under your leadership, and also whether, with your background in DARPA, whether you envision building more partnerships with the military or the government.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's something that, again, is a unique identifier of IGI. And it's something that needs to be focused on in the future. And I think there's
the society piece.
Right, exactly. The society,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got some things we've got to take care of right away. I mean, obviously we're living through this raging pandemic right now. That's going to require a certain amount of focus of leadership. I see other questions about sort of the how do we sustain the financial model of the Institute. I guarantee you that's something that is one of the top priorities that I have right now. Jennifer has sort of given me the responsibilities to manage the budget. We're developing a very robust financial model for the Institute. And just in a really quick nutshell, that's going to involve both direct donations that will support the core functionality, part of which is the societal piece, the societal impact piece. But part of it is just the communications, the budgets, keeping the lights on in the organization. So part of that financial model is going to be going after those gifts to specifically help with the operation of IGI. The other tweak and change I think that we're going to do in the financial model of the Institute is that when we go out to a donor and ask for a specific scientific project, whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's the diagnostics testing or it's the sickle cell or agriculture, we're going to also put in front of them the operational needs of the Institute. And I think that's something that for the sustainability of the Institute, we have to do that. We have to explain to them that you can fund the science and you can fund the grad student and the postdoc, but look, you also need to fund some of the inner workings of the organization of the Institute. So I think moving forward, I think we're going to have a very, very strong plan, and that includes the incorporation of the societal impact aspects as well.
Yeah, I would just add a couple thoughts to that. I mean, I think from the very beginning, the IGI has envisioned that our work is really integral to thinking about how we ensure responsible use of technology, especially genome editing technology, because that's what we sort of, that's our kind of front and center technology that we're developing, but I think more broadly, we are very keenly interested in making sure that people have non-experts have an understanding of technology, that they appreciate the science behind technologies that are developed, and that they're not just developed and kind of thrown over the proverbial fence out of the lab for somebody else to worry about, but that the scientists are actually engaging themselves in this thought process of how do we use technology responsibly? How do we make sure that information is conveyed correctly, factually, people understand, the technologies that they're using. They don't have to know all the details, but, at least at a high level that they appreciate what's going on. So that's something that is absolutely integral to the mission of the IGI, and has, we really want to weave that into, I would say, every program that we support, right?
The specific question, sort of, now that I'm reading sort of the specific question, seeing, we left it out of the two sentences. I don't think we necessarily left it out, because just like you said, I do see it woven in under pretty much every aspect of the scientific focus of the Institute. It's going to have that interwoven aspect. This is not something that we're going to leave behind. I also wanted to sort of address the military government aspect really, too, because I'm kind of in a really special situation. As you out process from DARPA, if you're going off to a company and a commercial sector, you have to sign away your life a little bit. You basically have to say, look, there's a 1-year cooling off period that you cannot go back and represent the new entity that you have. But because I'm joining a public university, I was put in a very, very special category where I do not have that 1-year cooling off period. I can't represent old contract actions and old projects. We have a DARPA project called Prepare that Fyodor Ernov is leading. I can't represent that and go back and ask for additional money or go back, but I'm not at all prevented from interacting with, advising, helping behind the scenes. I am given 100% freedom and license to help anybody at the universities, any of the associated partners that we have. I am an open book of, I could name 100 acronyms that you could go after that, probably you only know half of them that are available for funding throughout the government and specifically the military research and development enterprise. So I am, please email me. I want to help in any way that I possibly can to help people get in front of the right people to open the right doors with respect to that. So.
Wow, that's great. I'm sure folks will want to take you up on that, Brad. So that's awesome. And then there's a question here about, what problems do we anticipate? We gave a rosy picture of, the future of the IGI, but, as we all know, anytime you embark on a new endeavor, there are challenges. And, the IGI is no stranger to challenge. I think that what I would say is that right now we are really, really focused on two key things. One is that we really want to figure out how to make this truly a by-campus organization. And it really was started with both UCSF and UC Berkeley as the two pillars. We have the Gladstone Institutes involved now as well, which I'm very pleased about. And we really want to figure out how to advance that vision as a truly, it's not bi-coastal, it's bi-bay or something, institute that bridges our two great institutions. So that's one thing that we have. It's a really good challenge, but it is a challenge because they're very different organizations in many ways, and they're quite diverse. I will point out,
Jennifer, that during my interview process, you guys had me interviewed by the upper leadership of both universities, and it was a unanimous on independent interviews. This was not a joint panel interview where they were sort of riffing off of each other. These were independent interviews where they explicitly said IGI is that sort of the crossroads between the institutions, and that so we have support at the highest levels of the universities to be able to make this happen. But I think it's up to all of us in this room right now to really make it happen.
Really execute on it.
And that means there has to be buy-in from the ground up to really make it happen. And as leaders, we need to sort of come up with a roadmap to be able to help it happen more. And look, we have a governance board that's in support of this as well. And I know some members of the governance board are already reaching out, trying to start the conversation. to really make that bridge a more concrete reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other challenge is you know, as everybody is aware, you know, it's always, you know, how do you raise the money for the things that you really want to achieve? And so that's also our challenge here is, you know, how do we make sure that we have the Institute on a really firm financial footing? I think we've done, I have to say, you know, the whole team has done an amazing job during this current pandemic crisis of fundraising to support some of the immediate work that we're doing. And we want to, you know, continue to raise money for specific projects, but also, as Brad said, you said, you know, making sure that we are supporting our core operations as well. That's really going to be key to our success. And I can't emphasize enough how it's come home to me in a very real way over the last 5 months that when you have an incredible team that is ready to pivot, to address, you know, challenges that arise, you can do almost anything. And, you know, I couldn't have imagined that the IGI would have all of the things going on right now to address the pandemic that we do. And, you know, we've attracted many people, not just donors, but also scientists. You know, we have two, just as an example, two volunteer medical doctors who are working with us, volunteer to ensure that we have you know, a clinical operation going that's of the very highest quality, and that we can support people that might be testing positive for the coronavirus with contact tracing. So, you know, that's just one example, but, you know, I think when you have an organization like that, so it really is about having an incredible staff, and we do need to make sure that we have a strong financial basis to keep that team going.
Yep, and I'll touch on a little bit of the input of our anonymous attendees' questions. Yeah, one of the risks is being spread too thin, and when you guys did the sort of the strategic you know, alignment and analysis of the Institute, I read that entire document, and there was definitely a theme throughout it that says, look, if you try to grow too quickly, or if you diffuse things too much, then it defeats the purpose of the Institute. So that's something that I'm going to bring to the table, is that focus and that prioritization. You know, I think that that's really key to what I want to try to accomplish at the Institute in the early months of my new position here, is to try to bring that focus and prioritization to the development team, to the communications team, to the scientific team. And I think moving forward, we're probably going to see less of the take a chunk of money from a donor and spread it out into 15 different projects. We're probably going to try to do more of the COVID-19 focused kind of alignment, a little bit more so than the old model there. So hopefully, you know, look, that is what DARPA did. And honestly, I was just telling my wife this morning when we were out walking that I have a new job, but it doesn't really even feel like that much of a new job. Like, I really do feel like what I'm doing here is almost exactly what I did and what I was trained to do at DARPA. It's bringing people together, it's setting priorities, setting strategic objectives, and that all goes into the questions from the anonymous attendee there in terms of dealing with those that feel like they might be left out. I'm here to listen. I'm here to communicate. I'm here to hear some of those issues that might be there. I am 100% IGI. That's what I am. I am not a research professor. I am not a tenured faculty member. My job is IGI. It is here to listen and communicate with all those that are interested in joining and interested in the future of IGI. That is my job.
Wow.
So I'm excited to just get on, you know, get running and get racing and to try to accomplish some of those things.
Wow, what an awesome way to wrap up, Brad. That is a great vision, and really, again, so excited to have you on the team. It's just amazing to have your vision and your leadership now here at the IGI. And I welcome everyone to reach out to us. Let us know what you would like to hear in either this occasional fireside chat series, in our seminar series, and importantly, how we can support you in the kind of work that you're all doing. So thanks for joining, and stay safe and out there, everybody, and we'll visit again soon.
I can see people in person some point in the next 12 months. We can talk about that more later. I think that's all up in the air right now. I will assure everyone that just like Jennifer is sitting in that same chair that I've seen her sit in for the last 6 months.
I never moved.
I have not felt inhibited up until this point by Zoom. If anything, I felt really connected to people, and I felt the opportunity to really connect with people. If that does become inhibiting, then we might have to change the way we're operating. But right now, keeping everybody safe and doing the sort of minimal staffing plan, which involves a lot of leadership, sort of doing a lot of Zoom and communication for the time being. But I really do. I consider myself a people person. I want to meet everybody face to face. And hopefully someday in the not too distant future, we can do that.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brad.
Thanks.
It's been fun.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.